There are two reasons why I think this Whoopi Goldberg incident is important and worthy of discussion, and neither has anything to do with the fact that it is delightfully fun to revel in the misfortune of bad people when bad things happen to them, and especially when the bad things are solely of their own authorship. First, given how quickly this situation escalated and how big a story it's become, it could wind up finally being the thing that forces a reckoning. Christ, I sound like a Politico reporter. On the casual, almost reflexive anti-Semitism that has become so regrettably pervasive on the American left, which of course is a thing they do while they are also hard at work accusing other people of being bigots. The second reason is because this provides an opportunity for people on the right to firmly occupy the moral high ground. How? By coming to Whoopi Goldberg's defense. By saying, sure, she's a terrible human being, she is shockingly ignorant of world history, and she said a stupendously moronic thing. But should she have been suspended? No. Absolutely, categorically not. She's an American citizen, and we have a First Amendment. And besides, ladies and gentlemen, you already know the cut of my jib as far as how bad people with stupid ideas should be dealt with. And that's by providing them with as big a platform as possible. Widespread public scrutiny is where bad ideas go to die. It's the intellectual roach motel that we use to enrich the quality of our popular discourse. You will notice, of course, that this approach is diametrically opposed to the one that is favored by the media Democrat big tech complex, where they operate under a sort of infectious disease model of intellectual intercourse, where we keep unwanted ideas out of the public square by isolating and quarantining the people who are trafficking in them. So, you tell me which approach sounds more like what one does when one is confident in the rectitude and the veracity of one's own worldview. Because people who are right, and know they're right, and know their views can stand up to reasonable scrutiny in a free and open marketplace of ideas, such people do not endeavor to silence their opponents. And that's why I think we would do well in this case to stake out the tried and true position of the free speech absolutist. The one that says, I disagree with what you say, I think you're a reprehensible human being, but I will defend to the death your right to say whatever stupid nonsense you want. I also think it's important that Ms. Goldberg did not say anything here that rises to the level of anti-Semitism. All she did was to make a cartoonishly ignorant statement about the motivations of the National Socialists in perpetrating the Holocaust. She didn't make any generalities about Jewish people or say anything untoward about Judaism itself. And I think we would do well not to trade in false allegations of bigotry and prejudice if we wish to retain the moral right to condemn the other side when they do that same thing to us. And Ms. Goldberg didn't realize it because she's not a particularly smart woman. She's not even smart adjacent, but she was actually making the implicit, absurd claim that basically all white people are racist except the Nazis. Which, whatever floats your boat, I guess. But if we're being honest, this statement might have been the worst idea she has had since that time she dressed Ted Danson up in blackface and went out for a fun Saturday night in Manhattan. You know what else I love about people like Whoopi Goldberg? I love it when morbidly obese tubs of lard insist that I get triple vaxxed and double boosted and wear a goddamn stupid religious face covering for 2 years and counting because they have comorbidities. Oh yeah, you don't say. So if you don't mind my asking, what are your comorbidities again? Well, I've got obesity, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, and congestive heart failure. Oh, okay, I see. So because you've got health problems that owe exclusively to your inability to spend less than 6 hours a day with a feed bag strapped to your face, because you are congenitally incapable of mixing in a salad once in a while or engaging in any physical activity more strenuous than moving from the chair to the couch, that means I have to change everything about the way I live. That means my kids have to grow up rebreathing their own CO2 in a world of faceless zombie train robbers. Freaking brilliant. Thanks, Whoopi. Your lack of unwarranted self-importance is as inspirational as your 86-inch waistline. What's that? Jim Eagle just made a joke that I will not repeat, but it had something to do with the bastard love child of Jabba the Hutt and Fat Albert. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where the prisoners in the dungeon have the option of being tortured on the rack or listening to Joni Mitchell all day, and we have never even had to plug in the stereo. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea, and another shout-out, or a shout-out, as the case may be, to our good friends the Canadian truckers who are still doing the Lord's work up there. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And on the matter of actual bona fide anti-Semitism, again, I don't think these remarks of Whoopi Goldberg's from yesterday rise to that level, and I don't know whether she is an actual anti-Semite or not, because I can't read people's minds and see the thoughts inside. But I do know when it is difficult to reconcile one thing with another thing. And when Whoopi Goldberg says, "I stand with the Jewish people, I always have, everybody knows that," it is difficult to reconcile that with the fact that you are also someone who shows no compunction about referring to Israel as an apartheid state, which has been all the rage on the left lately, or to Israeli forces as child murderers, or to take the reflexive position that in any dispute between Israel and the Palestinians are 100% good and virtuous and oppressed, while the Israelis are 100% bad and evil. They're basically the Galactic Empire from Star Wars, to hear the way people like Whoopi Goldberg like to talk ordinarily, and especially when her good buddies Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib drop by The View for a bit of fun girl talk and a rabid, mouth-foaming Jew hatred. Now, these two women are honest-to-God anti-Semites. I've heard more than enough from their mouths to have a pretty decent idea what the thoughts in their head are. Each has been a member of Congress for about 3 years now, and each of them has had multiple incidents wherein they made public statements that were sufficiently anti-Semitic in character to warrant the consideration of a censure resolution in the House of Representatives. But we all remember how those exercises go. They start out with the first version of the resolution that says, "The House censures Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota for her bigoted statements against the Jewish people." And that version gets voted down. Then they come back with, "Well, the House censures a certain representative, possibly from Minnesota, for hurting the feelings of the Jewish people." Then that one gets voted down, and they come back with, "It is the sense of the House that, without naming any names, representatives should do their best to avoid making anti-Semitic statements in public." And then that one gets voted down, and the final version says, "The House declares that all forms of bigotry and prejudice are bad, and especially white supremacy, damn it." And speaking of white supremacy, back to Whoopi Goldberg for a moment. And we see this so often, you can almost set your watch by it at this point, where the celebrity says the idiotic thing, and then comes the public backlash. And then the person immediately schedules a damage control interview with some friendly fake news performance artist, which for Whoopi meant turning up on the Steve Colbert show last night. And invariably, the damage control interview just makes the matter worse and increases the reputational damage for the person rather than limiting or ameliorating it. So when Whoopi goes on with Steve Colbert, who has forfeited the right to be called Stephen Colbert, so let's just get that out of the way, and she goes into this bizarre soliloquy about, well, look, when I see Germans and Jews, that's just two groups of white people fighting each other, but it's like, when I think of racism, I think of people that look different. I think Steve Colbert was just wishing for the earth to open up and swallow him at this point, because what the hell are you supposed to do with that? You know what I might have said in his position? You know what I've got a mind to say to every dumbass leftist who loves calling people Nazis and comparing their opponents to Hitler, but evinces not the slightest familiarity with the history to which they're attempting to allude? I would ask this: have you read Mein Kampf? Shouldn't that be a basic and reasonable prerequisite for people who want to spend their days trafficking in Hitler and Nazi comparisons? Because look, as dumbass German political theorists go, Hitler and Hess were even worse writers than Marx and Engels were, but they never lied about their intentions or their motivations. They never attempted to deceive or hoodwink anybody. It's all right there in some of the most impenetrable prose you will ever try to read. But nonetheless, it's all right there, contained in one book that can be consumed in the space of a couple leisurely afternoons, a dozen years before he ever held the reins of power, when his name was largely unknown outside of southern Bavaria, when he was just some prison inmate doing a 5-year stretch for holding up a bar. Hitler laid out his entire plan, and he explained his motivations, which had mostly to do with his abiding belief that the German people are intrinsically superior to all non-German people, and consequently, German people have the right to rule the planet, or at least all of continental Europe, as the case may be. So when Whoopi first started stepping in it on The View yesterday, when she first said, the Holocaust wasn't about racism, and one of her idiot co-hostesses immediately chimed in and tried to help her walk it back by saying, but it was about white supremacy. That was just about the stupidest conceivable response. Because again, if you think the National Socialists were white supremacists in the 21st century leftist sense of the term, then you haven't read Mein Kampf, you don't know the history, you're talking out your ass, and you should really shut the hell up. If you had gone up to Hitler and told him he loved all white people, he would have slapped the shit out of you. 99999! The Russians are about as white can be. Hitler regarded them as Asiatic subhumans, not even fit for slave labor. Poles, Ukrainians, Czechs, they're slightly more useful. We'll let them be our servant class, but they're still partially Asiatic and thus not fit to be called fully human. Italians, please, have you seen how swarthy they are? The Slavs, don't make me laugh. The French, the only thing white about them is their flags. National Socialism was a philosophy of ethnic supremacy. Nazi Germany was an ethno-state, but the ethnicity was not white. The ethnicity was Teutonic. Hitler's master race was made up of one kind of person only. German-speaking Protestants who are free of any documented trace of Judaic lineage. And the war dragged on and started not going so great for the Germans to the point where they needed a lot more troops in a big damn hurry. So then they did have to all of a sudden have a convenient change of heart regarding who gets to be in the master race, at least for combat purposes, so they started recruiting for the Waffen-SS in occupied Norway and occupied Holland and occupied Belgium and so on. But that's a thing that was done as a result of the exigencies of trying to fight a war that you're bound to lose in the end. Nothing ever changed about the philosophical underpinnings and precepts of National Socialism, which was Deutschland über alles. The Teutonic peoples are better than all non-Teutonic peoples. And again, it is all right there in the book. Just read the damn thing. So when Whoopi Goldberg sits there and says to Steve Colbert, I just see two groups of white people fighting each other, it is not just an unwitting betrayal of a crippling level of historical ignorance, though it very much is that. It's also quite possibly the apogee, the pinnacle, the supreme achievement in the art form of lazy moral relativism. And our friends on the left have been working up to this pinnacle for many years now, but honestly, I don't know how you top this one. Even if you're coming at it from a position where you don't know jack shit about the history, it still takes a uniquely stunted intellect to be able to look at one group, Hitler and the National Socialists, and another group, the Jews of Europe, and boil the moral calculus down to, looks like two evenly matched groups of white people fighting each other to me. They both look like they've got the same skin tone, so it can't be about racism. Isn't that right, Steve Colbert? And Steve Colbert sits there with this stricken look on his face that seems to say, it's so much easier when all I have to deal with is dancing syringes. Who the hell signed me up for this crap? The left needs to make up its mind, whether to own their anti-Semitism proudly, or to reject all forms of bigotry like they say they do. But they can't keep having it both ways. They can't continue down this road of, I can say any horrible thing I want about Jewish people as long as I tack on the obligatory caveat at the end and say, oh, I'm just talking about the state of Israel. Israel is an apartheid state, a terrorist theocracy that enjoys slaughtering little Palestinian children, but I stand with the Jewish people. Now, sorry, Whoopi, that's just not going to cut it anymore. And that goes for the two of you also, Ms. Omar and Ms. Tlaib. You can't say you hate Israel and say you stand with the Jewish people at the same time, and especially not when your side can't seem to get through 2 sentences on any topic without blubbering about how much you love democracy. Well, Israel is the only liberal democracy and the only pluralistic society in the Middle East. Israeli Muslims, Israeli Christians enjoy all the same rights that Israeli Jews do. So maybe, just maybe, this Whoopi Goldberg fiasco will wind up shining a light on the anti-Semitism that seems to pervade the American left, but which up until now has managed to cloak itself behind the veneer of anti-Israel sentiment. And speaking of people who should cloak themselves more often, I'm looking right at you, Jeffrey Toobin. There is yet another sex scandal at CNN today. And how the mighty continue to fall. First one Cuomo, then the other Cuomo, and now Jeff Zucker has resigned in disgrace as CEO of the company. And I guess the most remarkable thing about Jeff Zucker's tenure at CNN is that he wound up resigning in the wake of a sex scandal rather than being fired for turning CNN into a 5-alarm fake news dumpster fire whose brand name can never, ever, ever be rehabilitated after the damage this guy has done to it. But having said that, I think it's hard to pin all the blame for what's happened to CNN on Jeff Zucker personally. When they hired him to be the CEO of their news operation, they knew perfectly well he was a reality TV producer with no experience in the news business. So it's difficult to imagine they hired such a man without the foreknowledge that he was going to turn their news channel into an entertainment product, because an entertainment product is the only thing he knows how to make. And today, on what wound up being Jeff Zucker's last day, CNN's ratings are so dismal that mid-level YouTube channels regularly put out videos that get more views than any of the shows on CNN's primetime schedule do. 5 or 6 years ago, it would have been absurd to suggest such a thing, and it's probably even worse than all that, because consider how much of CNN's viewership consists of empty bus stations and airport terminals. Which is to say, don't waste much time trying to figure out why the legacy mainstream media views Joe Rogan as such an existential threat. Joe Rogan draws an audience of 11 or 12 million people in a given day, while CNN struggles to reach 500,000. You do the math. Rogan's audience is 20 times as large, at least, as CNN's, and his overhead costs are a fraction of what theirs are. How many people does Joe Rogan need to employ in order to run his podcast operation? 8? 10, 12. Meanwhile, CNN's paying 7-figure salaries to all manner of people who are not even on-air talent. When Jake Tapper's producer got busted the other day or week for being a kitty diddler, allegedly, and his wife filed for divorce, I was rather shocked to see that they own a $4.5 million mansion on the Connecticut seashore. You're paying your producers that kind of money and nobody in your primetime lineup can even dream of sniffing 1 million viewers? Because, wow, if nothing else, it would be interesting to see what direction CNN goes in when they hire their next CEO. Frankly, if I was a reputable person from the news business, if there are any of those left, I wouldn't touch that job with somebody else's 10-foot pole. Where would someone even begin in attempting to rehabilitate CNN's brand name and to imbue it with credibility as a legitimate news organization? After 6 or 7 years of Jeff Zucker, can that even be done? Because I'm not convinced it can. When your live reporter stands in front of a burning American city on live TV and says, "This protest has not been, generally speaking, unruly." How the hell does a network come back from something like that? If Vince McMahon came out and said, "From now on, WWE is going to be nothing but legitimate sporting competition," would anybody believe him? Of course they wouldn't. But for CNN's owners, they now find themselves compelled to try and sleep in that exact same bed. And we wish them the best of luck with that. I especially like the excuse that was given by the junior producer with whom Jeff Zucker was apparently fornicating, and I quote, "Jeff and I have been close friends and professional partners for over 20 years. Recently, our relationship changed during COVID." Come again? So it's the virus's fault you banged your boss? Is that how that works? What, you didn't have a mask, so you had to wrap your underwear around your head, and then you accidentally fell and landed on top of his... And that's just about all the time we've got for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for watching. I'm indisposed Friday night, so I think I'm going to shoot an episode tomorrow and upload it for Friday. So if there's some huge thing that happens during the day and I fail to talk about it, that's why. Have a pleasant tomorrow. I will see you next time. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.